This time on Poll Up, we're talking to the co-author of a new book from the Gallup poll on how the pandemic has permanently altered work and what employers need to do about it in order to succeed going forward. Then, a Sunday Washington Post ABC News poll set the politerati over the edge because it seemed to show that Donald Trump will easily beat Joe Biden in a hypothetical 2024 rematch, among other things. But is it all that? We're a little bit dubious. We'll talk about the results and what it may actually say. And this is the weekend we celebrate one of the few things that we all have in common. A mom. Our Fun Fast asks a simple question, and dads may not love the answer so much. I guess I kind of gave that away. Anyway, let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I am Lee Marigot.
Among the many disruptions organizations are dealing with in a post-COVID world is how people think about work. Rewind for a moment. Pre-pandemic, a good deal of research and conversation on work was about the gig economy, if and how independent and often remote workers could improve productivity and lower organizational costs. Okay, now back to the future. Homes have become workplaces for a large proportion of office workers. Communication technology makes it commonplace to collaborate from locations around the globe. And employers are asking, how do we get our employees back into the office? Well, a new book from Gallup, Culture Shock, brings to bear research and data to guide leaders through this very new terrain. Joining us is co-author Jim Harder, Chief Scientist of Workplace Management and Wellbeing at Gallup, to share his insights and observations. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Barbara and Jay.
So the definition of culture shock is the feeling of disorientation experienced by someone who is suddenly subjected to an unfamiliar culture, way of life, or set of attitudes. So why is that an accurate description of the nature of work post-pandemic?
Well, you might think of it now as an aftershock, actually, but the culture shock did happen when we went from, some really slight increases in remote working. Flex time was the most desired perk to March of 2020, and then bam, you're talking the majority of office workers. Well, all office workers pretty much working from home. And then a shift in preference where now among remote ready jobs, 90% say they want some type of hybrid or fully remote option going forward. And that's not changing. And so it's a culture shock, not just for the individuals, but also for their leaders in thinking about how they navigate that. And we really wrote this book to help leaders navigate how they go forward. Based on the research we had a chance to do the past few years.
Are organizations, though, asking the wrong question by just trying to figure out how to get employees back into the office, especially when such a huge proportion of them would rather have a lot more flexibility?
I think it's too narrow of a question, for sure. I think it's relevant because in-person time does matter. There's a whole lot of research that shows, including ours, that shows in-person time does matter, but there's a bigger picture. And one piece of that bigger picture is people learned about some autonomy. They learned about some independence and how their work can be done differently than it had been done before. And they had a chance to sit back and think about that dreaded commute and how much of a payoff it really was, and to think about their own well-being and to think about their family life and what works best there. By the way, those are the three top reasons people give for wanting to work remotely going forward. And the commute, of course, was at the top. So that reflection, I think, is important for leaders to consider. And there's sort of an endowment effect that occurred where people had a chance to experience that freedom, and we try to strip it away from them. It's not going to be easy. Just taking a coffee cup from somebody that they purchased, the research shows it costs more to get it back. This is no coffee cup. This is a way of life. And it's been experienced differently. So I think leaders need, I'm seeing leaders take two approaches when you kind of look at the media and see the case studies that people are showing and the quotes, where it's either everybody get back to the office or we trust you to do your own thing. and to make it work. I would argue from our data, neither of those two options are the best option. And there's a more nuanced, but we need to be clear about in terms of the nuances. We can't just make it vague. And I think clarity and predictability is a key moving forward.
One of the things that struck me is in the way you laid this out is you talk about, is commuting, should we still have a commute? You just mentioned, is FaceTime important? And a lot of the answers are yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And this blend is what's important. I wonder, are managers who have been raised in a system that has not changed, the office system, for 100 years, is there enough flexibility to actually take what you're talking about in your recommendations and put it into play?
I think there's the risk of that for sure. And I think it's going to vary by leader. There's some leaders that have, you know, worked the way we've all traditionally worked historically. I guess I can't say I'm one of those because we've had flex time since 1969 at Gallup. So this wasn't much of a shift for us. But there's still challenges in terms of, um, you know, like I said, predictability and making sure that when people do come into the office, they can expect their coworkers to be there. There's nothing worse than making the effort, taking the dreaded commute, and showing up, and then you're the only one there. Why did I do this? Sort of thing. But I think there is the risk of that inflexibility from leadership, particularly traditional leaders who associate productivity with faces in the office. I was asked several times during COVID when almost every remote worker was spending time working remotely, or every remote ready job was working remotely. That the question was, how do we know people are productive in this setting? And my question back was, how did you know before they're working remotely if they're productive? And just seeing people, that's a bias, right? We think they're more productive when we see them, but we need good performance management either way, whether they're in person or remote. We need organizations need good performance management, and it can't be that annual review that never worked in the first place. It's got to be something much better than that, and we think we've got the answer to what that should be based on the research we had a chance to do.
Well, one
And
of
it's
the
fair to
things that
say it's not one size fits all, right? That
No,
seems to be the
no,
biggest takeaway that I get.
no. In fact, Jay, we have a number of companies that we've had a chance to work with that have reached and maintained very high levels of engagement, like triple the global average, and maintained through the pandemic. And it hasn't been a one size fits all. They've made sure it fits their culture, but they have had leadership who explained why they're doing what they're doing, and they got the input of their employees. They listen to their employees and their teams, which isn't done that often, by the way, and made it work for their culture. And if you explain the whys, you can kind of start to develop some rationality and some reasons why some people do need to be in the office more than others because of the type of work that they do. Um, but perhaps the people that are most damaged going forward, if we think about it out into the future, if we stick with the status quo, are the younger workers who are in many cases saying to themselves, "I know what's right for me now. I want a remote job. It works well for me. I don't want the commute. I don't. Um, I can get my work done." Um, but they need managers and leaders who help them see the power of development, how in-person time can play a big role in development, how it can play a big role in terms of feeling connected to a culture. We're seeing employees and employers start to separate now more than we've ever seen before. Engagement was on an incline for a decade, which is really encouraging, and now we've seen it start to decline. And the most troubling part of the decline is lack of clarity of expectations and lack of feeling connected to the mission or purpose of the organization. So that employee employer disconnect, that separation has increased, and young people development has decreased. And young people have traditionally always had an advantage in terms of development. Not the case anymore. So that needs to be fixed. There's a lot that goes into that, and we can reach the highest levels of productivity we ever have inside organizations if we get this right. Because if you couple autonomy with some discipline and accountability and some good performance management, you're meeting human needs, where they currently sit, which is, we all crave some autonomy, and we all feel really good, or most of us, almost everybody feels really good about getting things done with other people. It's a human desire. It's a human, basic human instinct. We love getting things done with other people, and performance management's gotta be designed in a way that they can do that no matter where they're at.
What are some things that leaders, managers should be doing as even first steps? Are there things that they should be learning and knowing about their employees to better understand how to go about transitioning?
I would say the most fundamental is something we've been working on for quite some time, but it's even more relevant now than ever before. And management is more relevant now than it's ever been before in terms of its importance. But it's knowing somebody's strengths. And what I mean by that are your innate tendencies, your innate capacity for success, and we all vary. Any of us who've had multiple kids know that they have different tendencies. They can be almost like opposites in many cases. We know as growing up that we have different ways of thinking and feeling than other people around us. So we put some science to that. We've got a tool called Clifton Strengths. It's now just past 30 million people have completed it, but we want to get that number up a lot higher. And the reason is it shortens the distance between people. If I know your strengths, I can get to know you much quicker. I don't have to keep experimenting in terms of working with you to figure out how you operate and how you think and feel. So I don't disrespect you, and two, that that we put each of ourselves in the right position to make the team work effectively. One person might be really good at connecting with other people and building new relationships. Another person might be much better at intensifying already existing relationships. One person might be highly disciplined in terms of the details that they follow on a rigorous basis. Another might have high focus where they just get absorbed in something and really need that absorption time in their daily work. And so that can help explain why somebody like me might need a couple days of work. Before the pandemic, I had one day a week that I planned to just get absorbed in either research or writing. And that was an important part of doing what I do best. And I've extended that now to a couple days. So that's a learning, that could happen and then still get all the other things done that we need to get done with the team. So those tendencies are really important foundationally because the reason that Don Clifton invented that tool, the Clifton Strengths, was to increase the productivity of conversations, to increase the value that people can have in conversations with one another. And it can be applied and has been applied by some large organizations in terms of their performance management to make that more efficient. And it can be applied in terms of how people develop effectively in the organization. And I mentioned earlier that the team component is important. It can also be used to help people think about how they approach different elements of well-being in their own unique way, and how they approach the same job as somebody else in a very unique way. And when we're at a distance or have less frequent interactions with somebody in person, if we know something about them, we can shorten that distance a bit. And so that's one thing I'd point to, Barbara, in terms of tools that can be effective in the current situation that we're in, which, our data would suggest it's really leveling off. What people are doing now is very stable. It's not like it's changing massively like it did in 2020, 2021. It's preferences are not completely aligned with reality, but that reality is kind of very stable in the general population the past several quarters, and we look at it every quarter.
And certainly those are tools that apply both to office workers who have the opportunity to work remotely and also on-site workers. Just before we go, what other kinds of choices can employers think about for on-site workers? Because, part of the discussion that we always have is this, remote, hybrid, how can I do my job in one place or another? And there's a good proportion, a very large proportion of the workforce that is on site, but also has preferences.
Like half or maybe a little more than half are still on site people that don't have the same level of flexibility. But they still have a need for autonomy. They're still human beings. And when they see other people with autonomy, they want more of it. I mean, the people who have dropped in engagement the most are on-site workers in remote-ready jobs. So there's something going on there. And so organizations that we've talked to, and we have a group of CHROs that we consult with regularly, Fortune 500s across the world, and they listed off some of the things that they're thinking about from a flexibility standpoint for on-site. And some of it has to do with flexible shifts. And the most common one is dress code, which everybody's doing, but nobody's going to change a job for it. So it's, that's kind of one to easy to check off. But there's other things like that you've seen a lot of press on, like the 4-day work week, which, you've got to have good coordination to make that work. You've got to align it with your customers. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. It can be a good idea. It seems to have some relationship with well-being, based on what we've looked at, but it doesn't guarantee high engagement. That still comes from everyday management. So no matter what your policies or programs or perks are, you've got to have good managers that have at least one meaningful conversation with each person they manage every week in any setting, to make it work. But they're also experimenting with, I mentioned flex time and changes in vacation policies and those kinds of things, and that is something somebody would change a job for, in addition to the 4-day work week. So those are all things to consider, as long as they're well coordinated and well considered, and that we don't expect the policy to, like you mentioned earlier, we can get too narrow in thinking about only policies, and not think about the bigger picture. And the policy isn't going to replace high levels of engagement or low levels of engagement, and that's something that still needs to be worked on.
Thanks so much, Jim. Really appreciate you joining us today. The book is Culture Shock. It's a great read for both managers and employees alike. And the most important part, it's based on data and research, and I think you'll find it a really good read. It'll be out May 30th.
Thanks for having me, Barbara and Jay, and wish you the best.
So let's turn to a poll that was released on Sunday from the Washington Post, ABC News, which is, one of these polls that's been around a long time and is held in high esteem. They still do RDD polling. We talk a lot about that. Random digit dialing polling, telephone polling. We still do as well. There are not a lot of us left. But this poll showed a few things. The headline was that in a hypothetical 2024 rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Trump's going to win by 7 points. And so a lot of the political chattering classes were like, wow, this is a doomsday kind of poll for Joe Biden. A lot of people at polling said, one poll does not necessarily tell the whole story. This may be an outlier. Other people were looking at the methodology and some of the other things. There's been a lot of talk about that. So let's start there. And Barb, let's start with you, because you get this stuff deep, right? You get the methodology and these arguments. What's your take on this?
Well, I think the first thing is that I think we have to take all of this polling going forward with a bit of a grain of salt. Yes, things are going to fluctuate. I think that there are things that we can pick out that are probably methodologically different than other polls that have been done in the recent past. But I think the kind of the herd mentality of just going after the conclusions and results that don't seem to fit the conventional wisdom is not a good thing for our politics, and it's not a good thing for polling. That said, I think one of the things that is a little bit different in this poll than we have seen in other polls nationally is the closeness of the party identification of the people who responded to the poll. When people look at party ID, and that's whether people consider themselves to be Democrats or Republicans, we often get criticized if it's not even. In other words, we don't have the same number of Republicans and the same number of Democrats in our poll. And the reason why we don't is because generally there are more Democrats than there are Republicans. And during other periods, there are more Republicans than Democrats. But it's rarely evening, except in this poll, where there's only 1 point difference between Democrats. It's plus one Democrat and over Republicans. So that can certainly attest to why we see greater support for both Donald Trump and I believe Ron DeSantis. I think both of them were approximately ahead by high single digits over the president. But it does speak to the fact that the president's approval rating, I think, has declined, has certainly leveled off. We had seen a notching down in our poll from when we had measured it post State of the Union. So I think that um, Joe Biden is currently getting into campaign mode, and there's good reason for it.
Yeah, I would say, just to jump in on this, be careful with any single poll as redirecting attention. Although, and I know, Jay, this is a topic near and dear to your heart. Media coverage of polls is sometimes quite lacking, and because this was either a new huge trend developing or an outlier, I suspect more the latter. But it's by a credible polling group, therefore it attracted an awful lot of attention. Unfortunately, if the election were held today, it would be 18 months from now at a time where things change almost daily. So I think that that's an issue to keep in mind, that these are anything but a prediction. I think there were a few things looking into the data that just didn't make sense. For example, Donald Trump does better than Joe Biden among people 18 to 30 years of age. Doesn't make any sense. Joe Biden does better among people who are over 65 than Donald Trump does. Doesn't make sense. Donald Trump, 27% of blacks say they're definitely or probably going to vote for Donald Trump. He only got 12% last time. And for Hispanic voters, the current number is 43, and he got 32% last time. So in each of those instances, it just doesn't ring true in the data. And maybe some of the errors are canceling out or what have you. But I just think the whole thing, may have tapped into some weakness on Joe Biden. I suspect this race will be polled a lot more. And obviously, we're going to be interested in the individual states, which are going to determine ultimately who takes the White House, if in fact these are the two nominees, which is a long way down the road. So there's just a lot of things here to say, go slow, easy does it, and let's hang around for some more numbers, which may tell a different story.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me when you're talking about like the age differences in the poll and the numbers there, but also uh, it'd be either 54 or 56%, depending on the question asked, believe that Trump should face criminal charges for a variety of different things. And they ask it a bunch of different questions. It's either 54 or 56%. Yet he beats Biden in a hypothetical horse race by 7. That just seems to strain, credibility as well. But like you said, 18 months out, is there really any reason to pay attention to any horse race polls? That's the question I'd ask, is like, you can go crazy over this if you want, but why are you paying attention to any horse race poll this far out? I
Now,
think that would be my take.
it's not lopsided. None of these people are at 50% or anywhere near it. Trump closer than others, perhaps, but it all speaks to what we've seen in every presidential election. Oh gosh, going back to probably 2000, um, is that with the exception of I think 2008, whereas for a bumpy ride, it's going to be close stuff in the end, and we'll have lots more numbers to talk about. Certainly in the time from now until these numbers are shown to be true or not.
Well, I think the White House should take note because this is not going to be, an easy road ahead. I think there are a lot of questions. I think there is a lot of angst on a variety of different issues, and I don't think either party has really solidified a strong consensus for the next election. So in that sense, I think the this particular poll does inform. It may tell us, what we already thought, but it certainly does inform that there is going to be a tight race in 2024.
All right, it's fun fact time as we reach that moment in each of our podcasts. And this one is indeed one where we can weigh in on without too much difficulty. If you had to choose which holiday is more important to you, would it be Mother's Day or Father's Day? And that was asked by CBS News in 2012, which our good friends at the Roper Center have provided via their archives. The national audience went, and I don't think this is a surprise, 72% went with Mother's Day, 13% went with Father's Day, 10% went with equivalency, both equal, and 4% said, "Gee, I don't know." So we do have someone here who I think can be a representative of at least has a vested interest in this question. And that's our friend Mary. Mary, what do you make of this?
Well,
Mother's Day, Father's Day.
I don't know if I have a necessarily vested interest. I mean, I always say all I want for Mother's Day is to be able to sleep. That's all I want for Mother's Day. But I would say Mother's Day because of my mom, not because of me, because of everything that she does for our family. But that said, it's hard to say because I always want to make sure that Father's Day is special for my husband. So, but I will go with nearly 3/4 of Americans, and I will say Mother's Day solely because of my mom and not because of me.
Okay.
Well, for decades, my mother just asked for peace and quiet. She didn't actually want to sleep, just to have peace and quiet. And I don't know if we ever succeeded at that.
Probably not. If it's anything like my household, I'm going to say you did not.
I mean, growing up, I think Mother's Day was always a bigger day for us than I mean, we always gave my dad, socks or a tie or something. But Mother's Day was definitely, there was the flowers, there was the Sunday, dinner that he cooked for and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in the majority on this one. Lee?
Yeah, I would say, I remember Mother's Day because I used to buy geranium plants for my mom. But then again, I didn't go too far because the forest was right across the street. So, I mean, it wasn't exactly a big effort on my part, but at least I remembered the day. And I can't say as I remember, maybe that's why I did no, I can't say I remember when I got my father for Father's Day. I don't remember it being, like a major event at our house at all. So,
Yeah, and happy Mother's Day.
I am your mother. You listen to me.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ethan Hollis and Eve Fisher.
if you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Maris Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcast app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next
I
time.
am your mother. You listen to me.